France and Britain will send military advisors to Ukraine in the coming days to begin the process of mapping a so-called reassurance force, which would take effect following any ceasefire. French President Emmanuel Macron announced the move following a 4-hour meeting in Paris of some 30 European leaders who committed to continue supporting Ukraine.
Emergency services in Kharkiv brace themselves for an incoming Russian drone attack. The missile hits, but the danger is not over yet. In the end, it was a massive drone strike that hit residential buildings and storage facilities, injuring 21 people. This was the backdrop as leaders arrived for the third of President Macron's gatherings to build a coalition of the willing. The emphasis now appears to be on one force to monitor any ceasefire on the front line, and a second so-called reassurance force, which would have a more robust but background mandate.
This reassurance force is a French-British proposition. It has been agreed by Great Britain and France. It is desired by Ukraine, and it has been agreed by several member states that have signalled their desire to join. There is no unanimity on it today, that is clear, but we do not need unanimity to do this.
Russia has already warned any European presence would, as the Foreign Ministry today put it, amount to military intervention in Ukraine and risk a direct NATO-Russia confrontation. Sir Keir Starmer brushed that aside.
We will be ready to operationalise a peace deal whenever its precise shape turns out to be. And we will work together to ensure Ukraine's security, so it can defend and deter against future attacks.
President Zelensky has said he was heartened by the determination to intensify sanctions against Russia.
No lifting any kind of sanctions until Russia will stop this war. And I think more pressure on it, more packages of sanctions. This is important. The second point, as you said, Keir, that new packages to strengthen Ukraine.
Monitoring the Black Sea ceasefire could become one of the tasks of a European or multinational force. Officials insist this will be a long and multifaceted mission fraught with danger and politics.
Well, just before we came on air, Tony told me more about the possible peacekeeping presence in Ukraine after a ceasefire deal.
Well, this is the third meeting of its kind, and there is pressure on the Europeans to crystallise these meetings into some kind of operational plan after a ceasefire takes effect. And that pressure has increased with the tentative agreement over the Black Sea for a ceasefire there. Europe has to come up with some concrete proposals. Essentially what they've agreed today is that France and Britain will press ahead. They'll send advisors to Ukraine to develop what they're calling a reassurance force. Now, there are two forces they're talking about here. One would be a classic ceasefire monitoring force along the front line. That could be a UN-mandated operation. But the second, more robust force would have a step back from the front line to be placed perhaps in strategic transport hubs or important cities to really demonstrate that if Russia tries to attack again, there will be a response. And the Ukrainians have made it clear that such a force would have to be prepared to be robust, to be able to respond to missile or drone strikes. The other part that was agreed today, or certainly re-emphasised, was that Ukraine should be able to defend itself. So again, more talk of boosting military support for the Ukrainian army. And I think the third element that was agreed today was that there should be no let-up of the sanctions regime against Russia. And that's in light of suggestions on the US side that perhaps there could be a relaxation of the banking sanctions against Russia in exchange for that Black Sea ceasefire agreement. So overall, the organisers here will say that there has been some progress here.
Now, returning to today's Paris summit, I've been talking to Suzanne Lynch, Associate Editor with Politico. I first asked her what was the significance of the meeting.
Well, I think today's gathering was another show of strength by Europe as it's looking on from the sidelines to these negotiations that are happening now between the United States and Russia and the United States and Ukraine about a possible ceasefire in Ukraine. I think one of the main outcomes of the summit has been a pledge for a reassurance force. This is what Emmanuel Macron has described it as. Now, we've heard European leaders talking about some kind of peacekeeping troops in Ukraine in any post-ceasefire situation. Now they're calling this a reassurance force. It would be something that's not on the front lines, but something within Ukraine. But it's still in an early stage, and we don't know if there's full agreement by all member states on this. Italy, for example, has been unsure about sending troops. Even Poland, which has been one of the strongest supporters of Ukraine and has been calling for more military preparedness, it is very lukewarm about sending troops itself. So early days on this, but we did see this plan take shape in some sense.
Now, President Macron said they didn't have unanimity on this plan, but they didn't need unanimity. For a coalition of the willing, it doesn't seem very willing.
Well, that's true. I mean, this is very early days. And I think what we're seeing now here is Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer leading this. And significantly, the French, British and German leaders indicated that they will send officials to Kyiv over the next couple of weeks to try and discuss this proposal with the Ukrainian counterparts, try and help prepare the ground for this. But I think what's really hanging over this, and one of the reasons why, as you say, you're right, not everyone is on board for this, is because most countries do want a US backstop, do want the United States involved in some way in this, and they're really holding out for that. So far, there is no sense from Donald Trump he's prepared to do that, but a lot of the leaders feel that, this is still in flux, it's still fluid, and it is a possibility. They hope that the US will be involved in some way. But if the United States is not, I think that's going to be hugely problematic for a lot of European countries.
The other main line that seemed to be coming out of it was that as far as Europe is concerned, sanctions on Russia are not going anywhere.
Yes, I mean, this is something that's emerged in the last 48 hours or so. We all remember a couple of days ago, the White House announced a kind of a temporary or a limited ceasefire about energy infrastructure and in the Black Sea. But then it emerged that Moscow was putting conditions on this, and the Kremlin said that it would only implement this ceasefire if sanctions were lifted. Now, the Europeans have said no to this, basically. This is including the SWIFT sanctions, the idea that Russia wants to get plugged back into the international financial system. And Europe really controls that, controls the cards there. So even though whatever the United States may be saying about this, European leaders again and again today and over the last 24 hours have said that we're not at that point, that they feel, the European Commission said yesterday, that Russia would have to withdraw from all of Ukraine's territory before this is even considered. So that is pretty much a red line for the Europeans at this moment. So it doesn't look like that Black Sea ceasefire is going anywhere really at the moment. OK, so that European determination to keep sanctions on, that's not going to go down well in Moscow. It's probably not going to go down well in Washington either. Yeah, we're getting some senses from administration officials saying they're open to this. So I think one of the questions privately people are asking here in Brussels and Paris, across Europe, is whether, what conversation happened between Washington and Moscow about this issue. What promises were made? What suggestions did the Americans take on board? From what we know, the Americans didn't discuss this with their European allies before or after, in the immediate aftermath of this conversation, this latest conversation between US and Russia. So really what we're seeing again and again is that the Europeans are out of the loop, be it on defence, be it on trade, and that at the very highest level of the White House, starting with Donald Trump and those people around him, there is very little discussion, particularly with the European Union, whatever about member states individually. Definitely Donald Trump and the administration have shown that they have very little interest in negotiating directly with the EU.
OK, I suppose that brings me naturally to my next question, which is tariffs. They're looming. We've seen what President Trump has done about the car industry yesterday, but there is an air of nervousness in Brussels about what's going to happen next week.
Absolutely. So these car tariffs, people were not expecting this to be announced so soon. And as we know, Donald Trump announced those last night, and they will impact a lot of European countries, not just Germany, which is the obvious one, but other countries across Europe that supply parts, etc., and also export their own vehicles to the United States. So a big worry there. Now, these tariffs are going to come in next week, in the middle of next week. And that's also the day that Donald Trump has promised other tariffs, these so-called reciprocal tariffs. And that's where, for example, the pharmaceutical industry could come into play. Again, Ireland is very exposed there, as would be other countries like Germany. So I think the sense we're getting now from the European Commission is that they're going to wait until the middle of next week, until all those tariffs become clearer. In the meantime, though, they are saying very clearly that the door is open to negotiation. They're hoping that this can be worked out in some way. So let's see over the next 5 or 6 days, can there be some kind of a deal struck before midnight, April 2nd into April 3rd, when these sets of tariffs are expected to come into play.
Suzanne Lynch, Associate Editor with Politico. Thanks for joining us on 6-1.
Thank you.